Welcome to Dark Mode. This is a very special episode that we have for you today. It's very special because we are live and we are in person in the Dark Mode studios. Gabe, how exciting is this?
I love this. To be in person with the three of you is going to be a lot of fun. And how good's the setup too, by the way?
That's fantastic.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be amazing. Now, joining us is two of CSO Group's finest. I'd like to introduce Matt Fideli-Siritish, who is the Chief Technical Officer at CSO Group and former Chief Information Security Officer at New South Wales Department of Customer Service. And we also have, to my right, is Hank Clark, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at CSO Group. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this Dark Mode podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
Hank, would you mind just giving the team or our community of Dark Mode listeners a bit of a background as to who Hank Clark is and why you're here today?
Yeah, certainly, Ben. Look, my journey into cyber was probably a long one. We were talking earlier before we started about how old I am, but I don't feel that old. But I'm ex-military, did a lot of work. I was in the Air Force, worked with the intelligence community, got to do some really, really interesting work within the IT space and the data analytics space, which was fantastic. After leaving the Air Force, I got into commercial industry and worked with federal government, predominantly down in Canberra for many years as a consultant, as an advisor to federal government. Again, got to work on some really, really interesting cyber problems, though we didn't call it cyber at that stage. It was all just IT security. Since then, I have been working with CSO Group for the last 5 years as both the Chief Technical Officer, sort of doing stuff that Matt was doing prior to Matt joining, but also just working in that strategy area, really understanding cyber problems, working with customers just to understand the challenges that they're trying to deal with and providing creative options around how they can actually deal with them.
Amazing. Sorry about your time in the Air Force as well. We'll breeze past that one. Matt, what about yourself?
Look, I've been a through and through cyber person since I was in high school. In high school, I started hacking the other school networks and realized that it was either a career or jail time that was ahead of me. And having been to jails now for part of my role, not for any other purpose, definitely made the right choice. I started off with my own business. We were running like an IT and started moving into cybersecurity. But yep, back then it was called IT security. And we were doing stuff like very targeted letter drops to try and find people that had unprotected wireless networks set up in their house. Did some time at Macquarie Bank, a whole pile of technical roles there, and then moved across into a whole pile of government roles where I quickly became head of security or CISO of very large organizations in government. Did that for surprisingly 10 years and then have jumped across to CTO and have been there for 10 weeks now.
Love that. I really want to dive into so much of that already, Gabe. I don't know about you.
Yeah, well, it's funny because Matt at the start was like, we'll probably get into talking about jail time.
Yeah, straight into
That's
it.
maybe not where we should go, but I mean, he's just pulled it out of the hat straight away, and I love that. So
That's amazing. We're talking about the CISO just quickly, Gabe. I want to take and run at the start of that. We're talking about the Chief Information Security Officer role. Now, that's something that I know that Hank and Matt, you've been in that role on the customer side, and Hank, something that you've been working with CISOs over the last 6+ years, helping develop security strategies and implement that. Talk about, Matt, if you wouldn't mind, your experience as a CISO and what that's like and how it's shaped you to where you are today as a CTO of CSO Group.
Yep. I will say that a CISO role is horribly stressful. The people talking about well-being and the stresses that those cyber security teams are under is just so very true. And I think you don't really appreciate that until you step out of that CISO role, which I've just done and moved into a CTO role. And you really appreciate the difference in what those roles were. Talking back to people I used to work with, you really don't appreciate how many times per week you're waking up at night time, checking that phone, responding to stuff. Whereas now you could have some semblance of well-being, which is really nice. So there's a lot of feeling for those people that are out there still doing that CISO role. It's a really hard gig. And I just don't think it's appreciated enough in businesses, what's being dealt with, what's being experienced by those people. So one of the things about me is I'm really passionate about well-being and that mental health really being pushed into those teams, like force-fed to those staff. Predominantly, there's a high representation in workforces of young men in cybersecurity. And young men are really good at pushing their feelings down, not talking about it, telling everyone they're okay. And underneath it all, they're out of control. And I think we, as a group of professionals, people that have done it, we really need to start attacking that.
I personally couldn't agree more. And even just this morning, Ben and I were speaking about the importance of health holistically in life. And I think it's really easy with alert fatigue, being always on, hyper connected, and yet alone being a part of the cyber function in a large organization. how stressful that is for people. What can we do to support the community and to bring in new protocols or just even socializing the fact that well-being is first and foremost critical? Because to be a good performer as well and to do the job right, you want to have the well-being. But what do you guys think we should be talking about today to help support?
Look, I think it's the same as anything. You've got to acknowledge that there is an issue in the first instance. As Matt said, a lot of people aren't very good at communicating about it. They see it as failure by saying, I need help. There are challenges that I can't deal with in my day-to-day job. And I think that is something that we need to be open about. We need to recognize where help is required. We need to have simple mechanisms that we can reach out to people and share a problem, because quite often sharing the problem allows you access to different means of solving that problem. Now, we were talking before around how in the language you don't talk about but or no or anything. It's yes, we're enabling, we're trying to assist the business to do things that they can't do today or can't do it in a way that's secure. As a CISO, we need to recognize where we can play, the things that we can do, and we also need to recognize where we need help. And I think some of the things that we're seeing in the industry overall around consolidation of even more functions and accountabilities within the CISO space, but also the devolution of some of those functions. And so if I look in the FSI space, you've got typically in the big end of town, they're having CSOs and CISOs, and they're consolidating but pushing the accountability up to another layer. So instead of a CISO reporting into a CIO, they're reporting directly into a CEO or a board. Now, does that help the problem or does that concentrate the problem? You've also got the other end where you've got CDOs, chief data officers coming into place and splitting accountability for some of the things that a CISO might currently be accountable for. And I think that's the good things. My view is specialization has a place, but separating out functions from the CISO rather than saying you're a CISO, you get to deal with everything and you get to deal with IT and systems and people and processes, sharing that, giving opportunities to work together as a team is actually one of the things we need to do more of.
You mentioned reporting away from a CIO and reporting directly to the CIO and to the board. I know that CSO Group have a big focus on understanding that cybersecurity is a business problem, not just an IT problem. Do you think that would alleviate any of the stresses that you've had over the time as a CISO, Matt, to be able to report directly into those channels?
Yeah, look, in my last role, I reported into a COO, and that was really helpful in being able to have that high level executive engagement. But you really were able to start having that conversation then about these aren't a me problem. This is an organization problem that we need to solve. Like some of the roles that the CISOs fulfill, or those cybersecurity teams fulfill, the impact of failure is just so drastic. And if your executive team aren't supporting you, if you aren't able to have those conversations where it's a we problem, the weight that you have on you is just absolutely horrific. And like the example I go back to, and also we're very supportive back with the Department of Communities and Justice. So that was all the jails, all the courts, child protection, housing assistance. In every one of those businesses, you look at failure, all the information about jails and informants. Well, if we stuff that up and data goes out, someone's probably going to die. Child protection, if we stuff that up and the data goes out, someone's probably going to die. That sort of stuff, the weight that it puts on you is horrific. And it's not until you start having those business discussions and you start identifying, sharing that risk and resolving it together, that job's undoable.
Sounds very much like almost moving towards this shared responsibility model. We know that very prevalently in technology, but certainly across cross-functional areas of an organization, or just bringing in other key stakeholders, decision makers, to share that load in a sense. And it sounds like a good outcome in my view, because if you have more people collectively looking to solve those business challenges, taking accountability, looking at areas of strength, and just, again, technology is so ubiquitous. So it touches everybody. And I think we know that and the three of us at the table being ex-military too. It's like I reflect back on my military career and just that old notion of security is everybody's responsibility. And it's just such a strong translation into the corporate domain and for companies alike. So seems like there's a bit of a shift happening there, but potentially as well with the acceleration of technology, having everything at your fingertips now, the sharing of data outside of a traditional corporate network, and these sort of mega trends as well are really impacting how we're responding to that in real time. So probably a few big mega shifts there happening as well.
To go back to the military too, I think there's value in that statement in that the collective risk model is evident in the military. Dating back to my time, there might be a specialized operator in the team. Let's say they're a breacher and their role is to make entry into rooms, facilities, whatever that looks like. Yes, that's their role, but the collective risk to the team is the second and third order effect. So that collective risk model then impacts the wider team and takes that stress level or reduces that stress level from that single person to have that collective risk amongst the team. Why isn't it happening today in the CISO role, Matt?
I think it really comes down to the maturity of the CISOs that we do bring into those organizations. Unless you've got like an educated board or those educated stakeholders above you, they're going to see back in the 90s, back in the early 2000s, it's an IT issue. Go buy some technology, go and resolve it. There's no way, there's no reason why we should be having these breaches. It's not until that collective education occurs that we can start to really appreciate the issue and start solving it. So I think it's really about the business buying into cybersecurity and about those CISOs educating in terms that they can understand and actually have tangibility with. If we keep talking about just the technology, it's not going to have an impact on those people that you need it to most.
It's a fair point. And talking about education, Hank, keen on your thoughts from outside looking into some of these roles that you've worked quite closely with over the years, talking about security culture setting and the education process within. We're at a state now where people understand that security is everyone's problem, as Gabe mentioned earlier. How do we then educate upwards of the CISO level to impact board level conversations?
Yeah, look, culture is really interesting because there's so many different aspects of it which are important. Again, we talk about the military and there's an assumed culture and awareness relating to the importance of security and control. And there's protocols in place to do that. Not every organization has that. And really what we're saying here is when you look at transitory relationships between organizations, the shared accountability models, all that sort of stuff, culture is not just your bubble. Culture has to actually extend beyond your immediate sphere of influence. And it needs to go into your organization, your supply chain and others. Again, using something like a defense analogy or an FSI analogy, they're mature in that space. They're doing more. They're recognizing the risks associated with dealing in that space and the importance of culture. Small organizations that don't even have a CISO and have a CIO with multiple hats are not going to be equipped or able to deal with it. They're not going to be able to easily establish culture without help. And as we said earlier, people don't ask for help enough. I think they try and make it up as they go along. They try and do the things that they can do. And really, as a community, we need to be more mature in terms of the way that we provide help and offer help to organisations at different levels. It'd be very interesting to see what government can do to influence that at all levels. It'll be very interesting to see what initiatives like Red Spice can do at all levels. But to me, it's if we're talking about culture, that automatically says this is a societal issue. This is an awareness issue. We need to do more from a grassroots, top-down, bottom-up type approach so that everybody is thinking about cyber and thinking about the importance of data and data protection in what they do.
Hank, would you mind just explaining Red Spice?
Yeah, Red Spice is a very interesting initiative that came out of the previous government. Actually, it's a $10 billion initiative, I think over a 10-year period. The intent of Red Spice is to develop more national capability that can support critical infrastructure and uplift Australia's national sovereign capability as a whole in the cyberspace. The funding for it came out of defence. It's being, I think, initiated in that space. There's been some recognition by government that initial thinking needs to be expanded. What is the national strategy? How does that funding support the strategy and the intent and the outcomes that we're trying to drive overall in terms of capability? And so I think it's still forming in terms of how that will actually be enacted. But the great thing is that it's an opportunity for industry and government to work together in the nation's interest, I guess.
Probably talks a lot about sovereign capabilities as well and just that landscape, I think locally, because just in so many examples, whether it's military or sport, I feel like Australians really bat above the average. And there's certainly a lot more leadership very publicly happening at the moment with Claire O'Neill the new minister for cybersecurity, there's a lot more repercussions happening. There's a lot more conversations occurring around how do we uplift the capability in Australia. And I think that's a really interesting time for us because the more we can think about what that looks like, help develop, form those type of strategies and narratives, I only think that's going to be better for the outcome for Australia. I mean, even pretty shockingly, seeing some of the latest media around how vulnerable Australians are with the use of data or double extortion and cyber syndicates or criminals targeting Australians for whatever reason. And that's very multifaceted. There's a lot more capability, I think, that we, of course, should develop here, but I personally think we're very capable of developing, whether it's more secure, like more national security sort of lens, or if it's actual sovereign technologies, those sort of things. And we're probably in a little bit of a hotbed time as well in terms of the innovation and probably even just the IP that is developing, because I'm noticing it a lot more in the industry, a lot more people talking about it as well.
I think the conversation needs to shift from, I love what Red Spice is, the subject matter of Red Spice. I feel like we really need to ramp that conversation into action and get into execution mode now. There's a report out yesterday, and today we're filming on the 19th of April. So this will be dated by the time it's released, and it's not a shock to anyone that we are the weak link in AUKUS in terms of sovereign cyber capability. That's not a huge shock, and it's, in my opinion, probably lazy journalism because it's a fact. But
Yeah.
I really think Red Spice needs to be ramped and go into execution mode now. I'm loving some of the conversations that are happening in critical infrastructure around that. There seems to be a shift in mentality around what we need to achieve. And there are lots of great organizations and asset owners out there that are doing the yeoman's work to get that embedded within their capabilities and assets now. So it is taking place, but I think it needs to ramp rather quickly.
It would be very interesting to see where we go with it. I mean, there is a role for government in terms of promoting capability and sovereign capability in multiple areas. Obviously, we're focused here on cyber, and that's an element about it. But the world we live in is different to what we've seen in the past 10 years, as an example, in terms of the activity that is going on globally, the targeted type of activity. Matt and I were talking about it earlier today around some of the stuff that's actually coming out of Russia at this point in time, that's being specifically targeted at Australia as a nation and at the community in general. There is significant monetization that is happening because we are a relatively wealthy country and we are connected. And I think we are reasonably savvy in terms of digitization, but that's got to come down to mum and dad as well. We talk about it from an organizational perspective. We talk about it from an individual perspective. And it's got to go down to the schools. It's got to go down to just that culture reference that we made before so that people are just aware. I'm constantly amazed at how readily people provide their information to others. And I was talking earlier about doing work within federal government. I worked with the digital identity program previously. And it was really interesting to see the way that people considered government having access to their information and the sensitivities associated with that. Yet the amount of information we give Apple and Google and Facebook or Meta and all that sort of stuff is just incredible. TikTok. And it's a level of awareness and understanding around the value of your information and how it can be used. The transitory relationships, again, going back to that shared accountability model, where if I give my information to entity A, but entity A have a relationship with entity B who has a relationship with entity C, who has now got access and control and management of my information? I certainly don't have it. And if I, again, put it into the context of mum, because I use her all the time, sorry, mum, as an example, it's her ability to have visibility and control of that becomes less and less. And when you put it into the context of Latitude, as an example, where I was a Latitude customer, didn't necessarily have that view that I was dealing with Latitude directly because I was dealing with Harvey Norman, as an example, who then dealt with Latitude, who then dealt with a third-party IT supplier who got compromised. And now there's 14 million records out there, including driver's licenses and other things around identity. And that's not a straight line. That's multiple levels of trust and accountability that you go through to get to that hack actually starting, generating, and being successful.
I think there's probably something there for the industry to be able to be a bit more transparent with how and where they're using your data. Like GDPR's got a lot of good there. I think part of the resolution, though, is also treating cybersecurity like a literal life skill. It needs to be nowadays. So it needs to be throughout your learning at school. You need to be able to, it just needs to be a part of the human growing up. When you're younger and you're in the physical world that we're living in, mum and dad are teaching you those things. Like when someone's coming up to you and asking you for money or trying to ask for your phone or something or another. In the physical realm, we're very good at spotting the con, and like mum and dad are there to go, no, we don't give me money. Don't do this. Don't hand your phone over. You're going to do a runner with it. Whereas when we translate that back into the digital sense, so many people aren't being able to spot the con man on the street. I think there's a lot of training that needs to go in there to help people understand. So as an example, I came across the other day, I was organizing a cleaning service for my house, and over email, we locked everything in. The next email came that said, thanks, put all your credit card details into the email and send it back to us and we'll process it. I didn't do that. But it made me think, how many other mums and dads, grandparents and people have sent their credit card details back to these people's mailbox? And they're being proactive. They've said, once we've printed this out and used it, we're going to dispose of it. What about the email? What about all that data that's sitting there? What about your sent emails that you've sent your credit cards to 25 other people as well? That training just needs to be a part of the way that we grow our children at the moment, because it's going to bite us if we're not.
Yeah, and it's got to go back to the systems and the way that businesses engage with people. Who here in the room has rented recently? I know I have.
Love it.
And who had to go through multiple providers and provide highly sensitive information in order to be able to be eligible to apply for a rental property.
I thought it was my NV1 clearance. It wasn't.
Yeah. I was just trying to find a home.
Same amount of questions. Though.
Yeah. Look, it's incredible.
Literally.
And the intricacies around right to be forgotten, around how they manage that. Again, going back to the Latitude had GE Money accounts, which were grandfathered over through an acquisition, which were more than 10 years old. Why is that relevant? If you look at so many different instances of the way that we engage with digital ecosystems, there's going to be lots and lots of examples of that. And we are naive. And I think as a society, we're a little naive because we live in a lucky country. And I think in general, we do trust potentially too easily. So it'd be very interesting how we do it. I love being able to trust. I am a little cynical. I guess that's part of my business. My wife's a psychologist. I work in cyber, so my kids are pretty shot in terms of how they deal with digital. I think they're pretty informed, but there is a big change which I think we need to make societally in terms of how we develop a more considered approach to how we collect and use information, how we manage information. I think CISOs will have a role, but I'm really keen to see how that CDO, Chief Data Officer role can function. I'm expecting to see a lot more of it. I think that currently the approach that most people use where you have a data owner, but they're actually a business owner and they're focused on driving the business outcome, I think having that specialized understanding and support for how data is managed. Less is more. Get rid of data. Don't just collect it. Don't just pool it. Don't just retain it forever. I think they're challenges which we are absolutely staring down the barrel of at the moment and that we need to solve quickly, because the longer it takes us, the more at risk we are.
There's a hoarding mentality in data, and it's evident everywhere. Every business that I've been involved in has had problems with data hoarding and keeping it for the sake of keeping it as a just in case. That's what needs to change now as we look at data being the motivation for cybercrime, because that's what they can then sell. We need to do a cleanse. It needs to be, and for me, that needs to come from government. That needs to be stipulated in some form of legislation or act, or supported by government in defining regulations about how and why and where we store data.
I think there's also a part for government, and having been in New South Wales government, I know that this is coming with them, is a capability to allow businesses to validate a human's identity without the ongoing storage of those identity documents. And that's going to go a long way to helping us if other states start picking up that capability, because then only one place needs to store it. That's the one place we need to protect.
So it does exist. I'm just astonished that we don't use more of it.
Yeah.
The document verification scheme is a federal initiative which is used. The FVS, which is a biometric facial verification service, is used. We're using it in airports and things like that at the moment. The digital identity space that comes out of MyGov is there. We need to be smarter as to how we can actually leverage those things. One of the difficulties of having a single identity is if that identity gets compromised, then how hard is it to recover?
Yes.
But equally, the difficulty is how hard is it to secure your identity when it's in multiple locations? So I don't think there's a perfect answer. It really comes down to risk and what the level of control, level of oversight, the ability to roll back if we need to is important. I think we've seen some really expensive and costly initiatives that had to happen around passports and around driver's license recently. The Optus breach was a classic of that. There was a big cost and a big impost on states around that. Is there a way to take that money and apply it into a centralized, simple, repeatable pattern that can be used for identity? I think there is. I think we've got a good start there at the federal level. It's just, will we actually then consume it at the state level and local government level? I'm not sure.
And will it be addressed across all the states? I've talked about the story before of moving from New South Wales to Queensland, where I had a digital license here in New South Wales. Moved to Queensland, had to transition my license across, and it wasn't accepted at the RTA in Queensland. I had to write to the New South Wales state government to ask for proof of my license because all I had was a digital license. So there needs to be some sort of universal agreement there that it takes place. But that Optus breach is such a manual process to recover from that. People going to the RTAs and manually filling out paperwork and then manually accepting new driver's licenses. The digital conversation changes that completely. And we could have algorithmic identities that are evolving so that if that single identity does get breached, it's only for that period of time until the algorithm changes where your identity is tracked.
Love it. That's one thing I was talking about in my last job before I left is with those licenses, like there's such an opportunity for us to push digital first, digital only even with those licenses. And the sell point for government should be the license is issued to you today. You've got your driver's license number, which is that unique identifier. But you've got that other number that sits on that card. That number, as you said, can be an algorithm that just keeps cycling. So if someone does steal it, like we need to design these identity documents for theft because we know it's going to happen at some place. If this has got a lifetime on it, much like a token for your MFA, that in 10 days from now it's no longer valid, great. That should and tied with a validation service. That's I think how we start to solve this is that we know that as much as we plan, as no matter how many defenses we've designed, there will be a failing at some point, and if it's not a failing of technology, it's a failing of a human. We just need to design for that failure at all times.
Yeah, and one of the other things that makes it further complicated is the ability for everybody to be able to assert who they are. So the level of confidence in that individual, in their identity when they front up to get an evidence of identity, whether it's a driver's license or other, is problematic. I mean, we've got difficult conditions in certain locations, or I'm not explaining very well. If we've got a homeless person, how do they validate who they actually are? So a digital identity doesn't solve that. If you've come out of an abusive relationship, if you've had to leave home quickly, you don't have a birth certificate, you don't have a home address, you don't have those things, it becomes really challenging. But that's where government has to step up and say, well, okay, we know that we can cover for use cases 80% and the other 20% we're going to have to solve for, and we're going to have other means to deal with those particular cases. Because if all we do is we say, well, okay, digital is the only identity, then that's not going to cover everything. And so again, not an easy problem to solve, but I believe it's solvable. And I think not trying to be perfect, but trying to be better and have systems in place that we can use for most cases is probably not a bad place to start.
Are there any mechanisms for any of those proposed solutions around today? Like Hank, you mentioned there's a few schemes and they're not necessarily enforced or flow through, which sounds like there isn't, again, that role of government or role of, localized GDPR type situation. But if we have similar schemes or similar frameworks that can help us with the use of data, the storage and that sort of thing, why isn't that already being enforced today? Is it because of the repercussions? Is it because it's just not a literal skill? Is it just changing status quo? Do you think we're in the middle of a big shift?
I think part of it is we're a federation. And we've devolved accountability at a federal level and a state level and a local government level. And we have funding models which tie into that and decision making which ties into that. And setting up one solution that people can adopt is very expensive. And it's difficult to do that. And you have to have everybody on board. Now, I think the federation works. I think that we've got great mechanisms in place to support a devolved accountability model in that. But we have to have a willingness and I think a real need to change. I think we are getting there. I think that certainly over the last few years, there's been some really significant impacts to the public and government has to be smarter. Again, it'd be interesting to see what Claire O'Neill comes up with that'll help encourage states and territories to work more closely with federal government around some of these big initiatives and then allow us to consume and adopt those capabilities. Because it's very much about capabilities. One of the things I find that we deal in a technology space, people think along the lines of technology life cycles and we forget about capabilities. If we look at cyber, this problem is we might have new symptoms, but fundamentally a lot of the problems are still the same that we've had. It's just the exposure and the threats that are applied to them and how they're actually being enacted is changing. And when I talk capability to customers from an advisor perspective, I talk about let's abstract from the technology, let's think about the business, let's think about the interactions, the transactions, the data, the workflows, the things that actually help your business to actually function and put systems in place that can actually support that, but do it from not a 12-month time frame, which is what we've got budgeted for, or we've got a technology lifecycle for. It's got to be beyond that, and it's got to be accretive. It's got to be able to add and improve over time as we can get the business to change. And going right back to where we started, what does the CISO do? What are the things we look for? My big thing is it's more about a change agent than it is about a technologist. You need a technology appreciation or you need good advice around the technology. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to affect culture. We're trying to get a business to care about amongst a whole lot of really, expensive problems that they're trying to deal with. Why should they prioritize cybersecurity over some of these other things that they're doing? And it requires creative mindset and it requires a really good communicator, someone who can actually set a vision and bring people along the journey towards that vision in terms of action. And it takes somebody who has a longer plan. Can't just be working, reacting to what's happening around them. It's got to be somebody that sort of has a vision and says, this is where we're going. This is why it's important for us to go there and can get people on board.
Have you seen that prominently within organizations that you guys work with at CSO Group when there is a really good example of a change agent?
I think you can get there.
Yeah.
Same as everything. I think you can be very general. I think we're very immature as an industry overall. I think we do have more technologists than change agents. It can absolutely work. It's where we spend a lot of our time is helping people to define where they need to go, their why, and helping with messaging. The messaging is really important. Taking people on a journey is about getting them to care, getting them to see the relevance to their day-to-day work. If I'm trying to do my job and security is getting in the way, then that's a big problem. It's about how do we actually help increase awareness and understanding of how security actually fits and why it's relevant, doing that education component, helping with the culture, but also giving people something that they can actually believe in and say, okay, if I behave in this way, it is actually better for me, it's better for my customer, it's better for the nation overall, because people will get on board with something if they believe in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet alone the power of language or the narrative, it's very human-centric, what you've just described there, Hank.
I think it needs to be. So I think what makes a really good CISO is someone that can create a journey and tell people a story about it and bring them on board with it. Like that journey is going to implement technology, but that's not what the CISO's role is. That CISO's role is to build that culture. And to be perfectly honest, it's to build the interest not just in your executive, don't spend your time there, but build that interest back to the lowest person in your organization and have them interested in what cyber is, pushing it from all angles, considering it all in all their work. Like some of the simple things that we've done previously is instead of running massive campaigns or buying all these awareness and training solutions, we would do something as simple as running a lunchtime AMA session, Ask Me Anything session, where you're on some live platform and people can dial in hundreds at a time and just ask random questions. So that got a lot of interest in and around the time of the Optus breach. But it's just allowing people to voice those thoughts that they can't get answered anywhere else and just consistently keep being interested in it. When you've got that passion and that interest in your workforce, when you want to go and change things that might be a little bit uncomfortable, like, hey, using a text message as your MFA option isn't actually secure anymore, and we're going to move to something else. Instead of just ramming that down to the people, it's about making it understandable to them. So again, another way that we've done that is to bring people on the journey and Ask Me Anything session at lunchtime again. This is why we're doing it. We've done stuff like where we've brought in people that are well known for hacking and had them sit there and demonstrate on a video call how they would actually compromise this and talk about why we're doing something. The pushback we've got when we migrated thousands of people over a weekend away from text message was next to nothing. There was no pushback because we had built a culture where people wanted that extra cyber. They understood the difference and they understood how it impacted what they did at work. So yeah, I think that culture setter and that journey, that storyteller is the most important qualities for the CISOs of today. And it's something that we need to develop in those CISOs of today. But for me, over my journey, it was only in the last couple of years that I've seen other CISOs being those types of people as opposed to the compliance person, the controls person. It's something that's evolving today.
You mentioned your key experience there, and I want to just take and run with it a little bit in that's a great way to get the consumer at an organization bought into the roadmap that you're trying to present. Alongside that, how do you then, as a CISO that's thinking differently and being that change agent, get the story, get the board and the senior leadership on board with that journey in the same sentence?
So the way you engage your staff members to your executive is definitely very different. With our executive team, so going back to talking about the weight of some of the risks that the CISOs are dealing with, it's really verbalizing that in the currency of the organization. And when I talk about the currency, it's what are the things that make them tick? Like they may not care if we say the words high risk. They may not care if we talk about availability. Their main interest might be the protection of their clients. And you have to find those words that work for that organization. And it's really describing every one of those risks, every one of those things that you're trying to drive in those terms and talking about what we need to do as we move down our path, which of the problems you're going to resolve with the things that you want to go and do. It's really, each time you're up there talking about these things, it's not talking about just one of them. It's talking about how this fits into the long-term ecosystem of things that you're delivering and wanting to change. And it's really giving them the opportunity to own and shape how we implement, what we implement, and when we implement it. So I think some of the most powerful things I've learned in my career is to bring that strategy to the board to say, this is when I'm going to do these things, and be very. I see some people when they go and present at their boards or to their leadership groups that they really want to present that they're going to ram everything through in that first year, or they're going to do so much so quickly. And we know from so many of the cyber programs that are run, we're not very good at doing that. It takes us years. There's budget blowouts, there's time blowouts. I think we need to be very honest with how long these things are going to take, because we need to do them culturally correctly. We need to do them technically correctly, or we circumvent them, or we don't use them properly. Presenting that truth to your executive team allows them to go, I'm not comfortable maintaining that risk because you've explained it to me in a currency that matters to me. I want that to go faster. What do you need? And that's the relationship you need to build with those people so that they're a part of the solution, not the people that just hand the money out.
As a consultant from the other side, helping impact that strategy to the CISO, would you add anything there, Hank?
Look, one of the things Matt and I have been talking a little bit about recently is the value in articulating threats that are contextual to the business as opposed to just talking about generic risks. Because quite often what you'll get from executives, oh, well, we've been operating in business for quite some time and that risk hasn't eventuated. And they're right. If we talk about general terms around the threat environment becoming more volatile, or we talk about some of the geopolitical tensions around that, we need to make it real. And again, as Matt was, tied into something that they actually understand and that they actually can see potentially happening. And that threat modeling discussion, I think, is a tool that you can use, probably not the only tool, but it's a tool that you can use to try and make something real. If this happens, this is the result to the business. What we're seeing that this particular threat is occurring more regularly. AI will be an interesting, consideration in that. Does that increase the likelihood of that? When we talk about geopolitical with Russia and the interest that's happening here, does that increase that threat landscape, and does it increase the risk to the business? Again, targeted attacks are happening more consistently, but we're equally getting tools in place that are allowing access to cyber capability in a very simple way that just wasn't there 2 years ago. And looking at AI in particular will be really interesting. I was reading an article only recently about voice and replication of voice in playing back for identity. As an example, researchers recently identified that as little as 3 seconds of audio can be modeled through an AI engine to replicate and impersonate an individual. And they've proofed it to the extent where it's been able to fool the ATO systems, voice recognition systems, and Services Australia. Now, if they can do that with 3 seconds of voice, it's really interesting. We had the conversation around the breakfast table on the weekend between my wife and children, and we've all agreed we're going to remove our voice messages on our phones or have someone else record our voice messages. Now, obviously being on a podcast, it probably, it's a little bit different.
What do you think we're doing today, Hank?
Yeah, exactly. But
Kind of screwed that one up, didn't you?
yeah, exactly. But they're things that you potentially need to think about, the way we've dealt with that, particularly with the mum and kid scams that are happening consistently. Record your child's voice on TikTok and then call up mum and say, hey, look, I've lost my phone. I'm in trouble. I need some money. Please send it there. Mums are always soft targets. Dads tend to say no, or at least I do in my family, but mums are a bit of an easier entry point. And
One.
yeah,
I'm just going to put out the initial failure there was the use of TikTok.
yes.
Yeah.
But look, they're changing the way that we have to consider some of these threats and how we actually deal with them. And again, societally, it's, we got it from a business perspective. If you look at things like the ATO using voice recognition as a ability to validate identity coming in to a caller versus mum and dad being hit not just with text messages, but things that sound like their kids ringing up and saying, I need help.
You said so many buzzwords in that last paragraph that I love, the AI, the threat intel. Just on AI, really interesting thing for you to try at home. I don't know if everyone's experiencing those phone calls that are an AI bot talking to you about selling something or trying to con you into something. I was doing some reading into them about the way that they're trained on a data set to try and derive an outcome. And I thought, I wonder if they teach them about math. Anyway, I tried that on the last phone call I got and asked it what 7 times 3 was. It went into complete and utter meltdown. So try that the next one you get.
That's my next rabbit hole.
That's one way to feel a bit of a conniption on the AI bot there.
For anyone playing at home too, if you hit bingo after Hank's the last one, then congratulations. But I just want to talk to AI because I think it's a topic of conversation. It's very topical. Do you see AI impacting the way we currently view cybersecurity and the strategies that exist, especially at government, and the potential impact that has?
Massively. I think this is going to transform the way we are attacked, the way that we respond, and the way that we educate. It has to have, it's going to have a cultural shift. It's going to transform human life. And just some of the most simple things to look at how it can be used. Like, look at the way that we test our children today. We send them home with an essay or long answer questions. I don't know if you've used ChatGPT to answer those questions. It's amazing. It's amazing what it actually can do. So it has to drive the way that we as humans operate. Starting to bring it back into our setting. I remember a long time ago working with one of the teams that I had who were fantastic at breaching systems. And one of the things we were looking at is how do we program what you do so that we don't have to have you really high cost resources doing this. There's method to the madness that you follow. Like you've got some things that you look for that tell you that there's something to go and look further into there. And we started looking at how we went down that path. We didn't get as far as I would like, but it was an interesting thought process. But now with this AI bot or these AI capabilities, that really is something that can be achieved. You don't need a human there doing this like really advanced hacking. It's something that can sit there and within seconds, it's done hours of work that a human would have done. And it's omnipresent. It's trying everything new that comes out at the second that it comes out. It can write code. It can look at a vulnerability, determine how it can be exploited. It write the code for it, execute it on the people that it knows about. It builds that database of who's got what assets and who can I hit with it. I think it's just the time to market for our attackers that are going to start to utilize this. It's going to decimate us. So we on the defending end really need to figure out how we leverage that technology in our entire tool set. It's not just about how we implement that into a SIEM service or a SOAR service. It needs to be the way that our ecosystem responds. If your endpoint WAF, or sorry, your external WAF is seeing some type of attack, it needs that AI module in there that it's able to respond to that other bot. If we're not going to start seeing that in our technologies, in our capabilities, and that data, that threat intel being shared in the ecosystem that we exist within, and I'd push it a step further and say beyond our own ecosystem. One of the things that I think that we need to do is share more as an industry. There's a whole plethora of issues that we need to resolve about trust, again, about sharing that information. But if we're not sharing where we're seeing those attacks and how we're responding to them in real time, it just means that the person to the left and the person to the right of you are going to fail if you've had success.
Just as critical to have AI on the defensive side than the offensive. And it's just remarkable how the pace of change has really hit the limelight, because we might have seen technological advancement within a few years or decades in the past, but like literally every week, something is transforming as it relates to AI.
That was a bleak outlook as well, Matt. I'm
I'm an ex-CISO. Everything's great.
Yeah.
I think
It's fine if everything's fine.
Yeah. It's one of those things where AI brings challenges and opportunities. And, it's interesting. Before, as Matt said, you had to codify something, or you had to have a programmatic approach to crafting a hack or doing something. Now you need to just ask the right question in the right way. If you can say, this is the context, this is what I want to try and achieve, tell me how to do it. Or instead of telling me how to do it, just go ahead and do it for me. And it's very much increasing the access and availability to these tools. I mean, we've had security tools and hacking tools around for a very long time, but this is just making it ubiquitous. And I was experimenting with ChatGPT the other week, and I was actually asking it a whole bunch of questions around a cyber strategy. Write me a cyber strategy, ChatGPT. And it didn't do a very good job of it. So there's quite a lot of work to be done of that. But it was very interesting the way I could craft different questions to get different levels of detail out of it. And I think with more experience, I could have maybe got there. Maybe vanilla. It was a vanilla strategy. Probably wasn't as creative as what you would want. But that does make a difference. And if you're an attacker and you're sitting at home and you go, well, actually, I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer, but I've got access to something which can generate the code that I need in order to be able to achieve the outcome. You just need to then be a problem solver or somebody who has the knowledge to get to where they want to be. And when we're talking about monetization, when we're talking about how you want to be able to access and affect a larger range of potential victims, I think AI is going to have a huge impact on that. And we really need to have, I think, better structures in place to take away a lot of the easy. When we talk about red spice, when we talk about the things that government does, you look at the really positive impact that cleaner pipes initiatives and things like that have had through Telstra and others. They're great. We need to do more of that. And we need to do it in a very, I think, coordinated and systematic way, because I still get a lot of text messages coming through, even with things like cleaner pipes in, and I'm sure it's going to get worse.
I think that like that AI as an assistive technology is definitely going to be how we'll utilize that in the short term. Like asking it to write code is just, I've done that. It's amazing what it can put out. I haven't sold this to a customer, but I've used it in an interesting context and asked it to write a policy. And if you've got some very clear parameters that it must work within, as in write an information security policy that's 20 pages long and is aligned to ISO 27001, does a pretty good job. So much so I advised our GRC team that their time was limited. But it's quite amazing, like when you've got those severe parameters, what it actually can do. There's a lot of positives that we're going to be able to use it for, like just even thinking like in a responders context, right? Like it'd be nice to just have that sidekick to go, I'm working on this. What does this bit of code do? Oh, cool. I understand that. When's the last time we saw that IP address in our network, and have that just the instant recall that today is 10 minutes of going through logs, waiting on a query. That this is where we're going to be able to leverage that power. So yeah, look, Gabe, there are some positives as well.
Yeah, nice. Love it.
Yeah.
Love to hear it from you, Matt. Absolutely.
I'm going to say something potentially profound here, and I'm not sure how many of the community will agree with me or not, or anyone in this room, but I feel it's going to further empower or weaponize social engineers who are traditionally not technical, and this is going to upset some people back home, but not technical enough to write the code to potentially disrupt a network, but use their skill sets to gain an advantage. They're the ones that are going to benefit from AI on the nefarious side, to be able to leverage it for capabilities that they just didn't have previously or the time to learn. That's going to be an interesting evolution of the social engineer.
I completely agree. What was your website again?
Exactly. Matt, you mentioned ecosystems a couple of times before, and it was echoed in Hank's commentary as well. If we use importance as a value, what do you value? How much do you value ecosystems currently as CSO Group and for customers on the other side?
So for me, ecosystems in cybersecurity are what is going to make and break us. So if I go back to a very first part of the conversation about well-being as well, I think we need that human ecosystem as well. We need those peers. It doesn't have to like. Whilst I can say like CISO Lens is an amazing organization to be a part of and have access to those other CISOs and those peers, it doesn't need to be something that formal. It can just be a group of people that you know, and it's that opportunity to have that, to be really honest, to be able to talk to people about the problems, the way that you're feeling, and being able to know that those people understand you and are able to assist you. And it's just great to have that ecosystem where you can throw a problem and 3 other people have solved it before you and just bounce and work together. The same when we move into our technology. The technology that we put in can no longer be a single point solution. It needs to be a part of an ecosystem, and it needs to work with that ecosystem. And talking back to that example of your WAF on the outer edge of your network needs to be able to send that threat intel back to the technologies that are protecting the rest of your network about what that attacker looked like, what they were doing, what's potentially occurring, because that information allows us to start protecting ourselves. The same as if we go back to our human context, if you know that there's someone dodgy, or let's go back to a really good Australian example. Magpies back when you were a kid. Everyone knew where the magpies were because all the kids would share that information. Don't go down that street, that magpie's vicious. We don't do that as well in the security ecosystems. Like we got some really tight knit groups that will share it, but we need to do that so much more globally, not just within our own technology, but then expanding that out across your sector or with the people you're comfortable having a relationship with. That was one of the nicer things that I saw in New South Wales government is if one of us gets attacked, if one of us gets hurt, we all need to collectively learn from that and not suffer the same outcomes. So when there is something bad going on, the hiding it doesn't solve the problem. Not telling people doesn't solve the problem. Telling people all the ISCs, the TTPs that you've got, and being quick with that information allows us to protect one another. It's something that you're going to gain a lot from. Moving back into technology, look, having best of breed technologies is fantastic, but unless they're playing together, that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck. That's where you start to get all the APIs talking to one another. And I really hope that with some of the solutions that we've got coming into the future, that we are moving beyond it's got an API to we've built the ecosystem and it's click and play pretty well.
Yeah, look, I guess there's little S systems and there's big S systems. So, systems that are part of larger systems. And it's pretty rare nowadays, I think, that anyone can say we're all in with one particular system. Everything's all there and it's easy and it's front and we understand it. Now we've got multiple clouds and we've still got the on-prem capability. We've got shared accountability models that we were talking about earlier, where we've got different people doing different functions within it. And from a CISO perspective, you need to understand how that works together, because ultimately you can have all your really sensitive information in the cloud. But if you've got a weakness on an on-prem system which is connected to it and allows access into that, then that's a problem. Or if you've got part of your workforce, which is made up of multiple groups and multiple teams that are actually doing things, and if there's a weak point in that, within that ecosystem or within that team, that could then allow somebody to get access to things that they shouldn't get access to. And we need to think, again, going back to capability, in order to establish an end-to-end capability within an ecosystem, you need to think about your extended workforce. You can't just say, I'm a dark mode t-shirt wearing person. It's really around, well, okay, who are the partners that we're working with? How do they engage? What are their accountabilities? What are the things they do? How do we actually maintain transparency in what they do and proactivity in terms of how we deal with them? I work in the provider space, so we deliver services to a bunch of our customers. And I like to think of us as just being part of their team. We might operate slightly differently, we might look slightly different, but ultimately we're there on that same path. And we are a really fundamental component of their security apparatus. And we need to be seen as such, and we need to be part of what they do. So they need to be transparent. We need to know when changes are happening within their environment. They need to know when changes are happening in our environment. And the best way to do that is to get in a room. I struggle a little bit with the virtual nature of things. I'm very much about relationships, and I like the opportunity to be able to get into a more collegiate option where we're in a room, we're whiteboarding, we're doing things, we're very transparent in terms of how we work. We're losing a lot of that as we continue to diversify, as we continue to operate from home in a hybrid working environment and doing things like that. I think from that ecosystem perspective, where you've got potentially large groups of people, the more you can do to connect them and to bring them in together as a single team rather than, whether it's matrix or whether, rather than just a group of individuals, I think that that's really important.
Love it. We talk about ecosystems all day, but Ben thinks that number one value for us in even just the creation of dark mode was very much community driven, and having that at the forefront of everything we do, just to socialize things more, share more information, and be a part of that conversation too. So yeah, talk about ecosystems for the next hour.
Welcome to episode 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all into it.
Look, we've already gone over the allocated time. I feel like we could continually to talk here for a number of hours because the conversation really has been quite profound from my own personal learnings. Speaking on behalf of Gabe, I know that there's probably a lot that you've learned as well.
Yeah.
Just to get the insights from yourself, Matt, and yourself, Hank, has been really unique. So I know that our dark mode community is going to learn a lot from this episode. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with, Gabe, or final questions?
Yeah, I just really appreciate the time. It's been super insightful for me personally as well. So do appreciate you speaking on my behalf there, Ben. Always nail it. It's been really insightful, and trust that we are able to do it again sometime. So thanks very much on behalf of the entire dark mode community and the cybersecurity, from IT security to cyber and InfoSec and everything in between across the region. Really appreciate the time, gents. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
And that is another in-person live dark mode podcast recording.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or leave us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. See you on the next episode of Dark Mode.